It was an ordinary morning in the bustling city of Ridgewood, where the skyscrapers seemed to scrape not just the clouds but also the hopes of those working tirelessly within them. Sandra, a 45-year-old cleaning lady with sharp eyes and a determined spirit, began her day as she always did, quietly pushing her cleaning cart through the glossy halls of Alpha Corp, one of the largest corporations in the city. To most, Sandra was invisible, a woman wearing a crisp uniform and a polite smile, blending into the background of the corporate machinery. But Sandra had a secret. Though her job title labeled her as a cleaner, her mind was anything but ordinary. Years ago, she had dropped out of college to care for her ailing mother, a decision she never regretted but one that rerouted her life into a cycle of blue-collar work. What people didn't know was that she had a knack for understanding people and systems, a natural talent for spotting inconsistencies and patterns. She didn't just clean desks and floors, she observed. She saw things others missed, overheard conversations dismissed as unimportant, and noticed patterns in the behaviors of those who walked the hallways with their expensive suits and air of authority. That morning, something felt different. Sandra arrived early, as usual, to clean the executive floor before the day's meetings began. The large glass offices were empty, bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. She moved silently, her gloves swiping over the sleek surfaces of conference tables, her mind wandering as she hummed a tune under her breath. It was in the CEO's office, however, that the first thread of an unraveling mystery caught her attention. Sandra had been in the CEO's office countless times before. Mr. Douglas Carrington was a man of power, charm, and arrogance. His office screamed opulence, leather-bound books, a polished oak desk, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. As she cleaned, Sandra noticed something unusual on the desk, a folder hastily left open, its contents slightly spilling out. She never invaded privacy, but the words in bold across the top caught her eye: urgent, discrepancies in accounts. Her heart skipped. She glanced around the room to ensure she was alone. A single glance at the top page revealed columns of numbers that didn't seem to add up. As quickly as she saw it, she placed the folder back in its exact position, her mind racing. It wasn't her business, but something about the document felt wrong. Sandra knew enough to recognize when someone was trying to cover their tracks. Later that day, as the corporate machine roared to life with hurried footsteps and ringing phones, Sandra went about her duties as usual, but the numbers from the document lingered in her mind. Her sharp observational skills kicked in. Over the next few days, she started noticing more anomalies. Mr. Carrington had become more reclusive, shutting himself in his office for hours. It was an ordinary morning in the bustling city of Ridgewood, where the skyscrapers seemed to scrape not just the clouds but also the hopes of those working tirelessly within them. Sandra, a 45-year-old cleaning lady with sharp eyes and a determined spirit, began her day as she always did, quietly pushing her cleaning cart through the glossy halls of Alpha Corp, one of the largest corporations in the city. To most, Sandra was invisible, a woman wearing a crisp uniform and a polite smile, blending into the background of the corporate machinery. But Sandra had a secret. Though her job title labeled her as a cleaner, her mind was anything but ordinary. Years ago, she had dropped out of college to care for her ailing mother, a decision she never regretted but one that rerouted her life into a cycle of blue-collar work. What people didn't know was that she had a knack for understanding people and systems, a natural talent for spotting inconsistencies and patterns. She didn't just clean desks and floors, she observed. She saw things others missed, overheard conversations dismissed as unimportant, and noticed patterns in the behaviors of those who walked the hallways with their expensive suits and air of authority. That morning, something felt different. Sandra arrived early, as usual, to clean the executive floor before the day's meetings began. The large glass offices were empty, bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. She moved silently, her gloves swiping over the sleek surfaces of conference tables, her mind wandering as she hummed a tune under her breath. It was in the CEO's office, however, that the first thread of an unraveling mystery caught her attention. Sandra had been in the CEO's office countless times before. Mr. Douglas Carrington was a man of power, charm, and arrogance. His office screamed opulence, leather-bound books, a polished oak desk, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. As she cleaned, Sandra noticed something unusual on the desk, a folder hastily left open, its contents slightly spilling out. She never invaded privacy, but the words in bold across the top caught her eye: urgent, discrepancies in accounts. Her heart skipped. She glanced around the room to ensure she was alone. A single glance at the top page revealed columns of numbers that didn't seem to add up. As quickly as she saw it, she placed the folder back in its exact position, her mind racing. It wasn't her business, but something about the document felt wrong. Sandra knew enough to recognize when someone was trying to cover their tracks. Later that day, as the corporate machine roared to life with hurried footsteps and ringing phones, Sandra went about her duties as usual, but the numbers from the document lingered in her mind. Her sharp observational skills kicked in. Over the next few days, she started noticing more anomalies. Mr. Carrington had become more reclusive, shutting himself in his office for hours. She thought of her late mother, who had always told her to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. She thought of Mia, who deserved to grow up in a world where integrity mattered. Sandra made a decision. She would act, not for herself, but for the employees whose livelihoods were at stake, and for the principle that no one was above accountability. The next day, she carefully drafted an anonymous letter outlining her findings and included copies of the evidence she had collected. She left the envelope on the desk of the company's legal department, her hands trembling as she walked away. The ball was now rolling, and there was no turning back. Sandra didn't know what to expect, but she couldn't have predicted what happened next. Within hours, whispers of an internal investigation began to spread. Employees were called into meetings, and the atmosphere in the office grew tense. Sandra continued her work quietly, pretending to know nothing, but her heart pounded every time she passed by the CEO's office. A week later, as Sandra cleaned the empty halls late at night, she received an unexpected call. It was Jake. "Sandra, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice urgent. She agreed to meet him in the break room, where he revealed that her anonymous letter had triggered a chain of events that was rapidly exposing the CEO's misconduct. "I don't know who did it, but whoever they are, they're brave," Jake said. Sandra nodded, hiding her smile. For the first time, she felt the weight of her actions and the power of her decision. Sandra didn't yet realize that her story was only beginning. Sandra's decision to expose the truth had already set a chain reaction in motion, but she was unaware of just how far-reaching the consequences would be. The following days at AlphaCorp felt like the calm before a storm, with an eerie tension hanging in the air. Employees whispered in corridors, and hushed conversations filled the break rooms as rumors of an internal investigation spread like wildfire. For Sandra, each day brought a mix of anxiety and hope, her heart pounding every time she walked past the CEO's office. The legal team had taken the anonymous evidence seriously, and subtle changes began to occur. Auditors were seen coming and going from the building, their briefcases full of documents, their expressions unreadable. Sandra, who had always been invisible to most, now found herself feeling hypervisible, as if every glance her way carried suspicion. She kept her head down and her routine unchanged, but the knowledge of her role in exposing the truth weighed heavily on her mind. She began to question if she had done enough or if the storm she had unleashed might spiral out of control. It wasn't long before the investigation reached a boiling point. Late one evening, long after most employees had gone home, Sandra was cleaning the executive floor when she noticed the lights on in the boardroom. She hesitated, then quietly approached the room, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. Inside, she saw a group of board members engaged in an intense discussion, their faces etched with concern. The air was thick with tension, and though Sandra couldn't hear their words, she could tell something significant was unfolding. She quickly retreated, her pulse racing, and returned to her cleaning cart, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. The next morning, the CEO, Douglas Carrington, was noticeably absent. His assistant, who was usually cool and composed, appeared flustered, her phone constantly ringing as she fielded inquiries about his whereabouts. By lunchtime, the news had spread. Carrington had been placed on a temporary leave of absence pending the outcome of the investigation. The announcement sent shockwaves through the company, leaving employees both stunned and intrigued. For Sandra, it was a moment of validation, but also one of trepidation. She knew this was just the beginning, and the real fight was yet to come. As the investigation deepened, Sandra began to notice subtle shifts in the behavior of those around her. Jake, the junior manager who had confided in her, seemed more withdrawn, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a cautious reserve. The employees who had once been vocal about their frustrations with the company's leadership now seemed wary, as if they feared being implicated in the unfolding drama. Even the cleaning staff, Sandra's closest confidants, spoke in hushed tones, their usual camaraderie replaced by an undercurrent of unease. Despite her growing anxiety, Sandra remained resolute. She continued to keep a low profile, observing everything and trusting no one. It was during one of her late-night shifts that she stumbled upon another clue, one that would prove to be a game-changer. As she was emptying the trash in a small conference room, her eyes caught sight of a crumpled piece of paper on the floor. She picked it up, intending to throw it away, but a single glance at the text stopped her in her tracks. The document was a draft email from Carrington to an unknown recipient, discussing the transfer of funds to an offshore account. Though incomplete, the email hinted at the scale of the corruption Sandra had uncovered. She quickly folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket, her mind racing with the implications. The next day, Sandra found herself in a moral quandary. She knew the document was crucial evidence, but submitting it anonymously might raise questions about how it had been obtained. As she wrestled with her decision, she overheard a conversation between two board members in the cafeteria. They were discussing the possibility of whistleblowers within the company, their tone a mix of suspicion and admiration. One of them mentioned that the investigation had already uncovered significant financial discrepancies, but they lacked the final piece of evidence to link Carrington directly to the embezzlement. Sandra realized that the paper in her possession might be that missing piece. That evening, Sandra made a bold decision. She carefully scanned the document and included it in another anonymous letter, this time addressing it directly to the head of the legal team. She left the envelope in the same spot as before, her hands shaking as she walked away. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her, but she reminded herself of why she had started this journey, to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity. The legal team acted swiftly, and the board called an emergency meeting to address the mounting evidence against Carrington. Employees were instructed to attend a company-wide town hall, where the board would provide updates on the situation. Sandra, like everyone else, was curious but apprehensive. She wondered if her anonymous contributions would remain a secret or if someone would piece together her involvement. The town hall was held in the company's grand auditorium, a space usually reserved for celebrations and high-profile events. As Sandra took her seat at the back of the room, she couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and fear. The atmosphere was electric, with employees whispering and speculating about what was to come. When the board members took the stage, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on them. The head of the legal team stepped forward, his expression somber yet resolute. He began by acknowledging the hard work and dedication of the employees, then transitioned into the findings of the investigation. Over the past several weeks, we have been conducting a thorough review of the company's financial records, he said. What we have uncovered is deeply troubling. He went on to detail the extent of the corruption, outlining how funds had been siphoned off into offshore accounts and how decisions had been made to prioritize personal gain over the company's well-being. As he spoke, gasps and murmurs filled the room. Sandra watched as her colleagues' faces shifted from shock to anger, their disbelief giving way to a collective sense of betrayal. The legal team concluded by announcing that Carrington had been officially terminated and that legal proceedings were underway to hold him accountable for his actions. They also revealed plans to implement sweeping reforms within the company to prevent such abuses of power in the future. The room erupted into applause, a cathartic release of the tension that had been building for weeks. As Sandra sat quietly in her seat, a wave of emotions washed over her. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that her actions had played a role in bringing justice to a corrupt system. At the same time, she felt a lingering fear of being discovered, fear of the unknown, fear of what lay ahead. But above all, she felt hope. Hope that her small act of courage could inspire others to stand up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The journey was far from over, but Sandra knew one thing for certain: she had made a difference. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel proud. As the dust began to settle from the dramatic town hall meeting, AlphaCorp entered a phase of transition, uncertainty, and introspection. Employees returned to their desks the next day, still buzzing about the revelations, but the atmosphere in the office was fundamentally altered. Trust had been shattered, not just in the leadership but in the very fabric of the company. Sandra, quietly pushing her cleaning cart through the hushed hallways, felt the shift deeply. She had always existed on the periphery, observing the corporate machine from the shadows. Now, she was part of its story, even if no one knew it. In the aftermath of Douglas Carrington's firing, the company began implementing sweeping reforms. The board brought in a forensic accounting team to comb through every aspect of the company's finances, and an interim CEO was appointed to steer AlphaCorp through the turbulent waters. Employees were required to attend ethics workshops, and anonymous feedback channels were established to encourage transparency and accountability. On the surface, these changes seemed promising, but Sandra could sense the lingering unease. People walked on eggshells, unsure of who could be trusted. Sandra herself wrestled with conflicting emotions. She was proud of what she had accomplished, yet she couldn't shake the fear of being discovered. Every glance in her direction felt loaded with suspicion, even though she knew logically that no one had any reason to suspect her. She found solace in her daughter, Mia, who continued to be her greatest source of inspiration. Mia had recently been accepted into a prestigious university, a testament to her hard work and Sandra's unwavering support. Watching Mia thrive gave Sandra the strength to face the uncertainty of her own situation. One evening, as Sandra was finishing her shift, Jake approached her in the break room. He looked more relaxed than he had in weeks, and there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Sandra," he began hesitantly, "I don't know if you've heard, but the board is looking for employees to join a new committee they're forming. It's part of the company's effort to rebuild trust and ensure something like this never happens again. They're calling it the Integrity and Compliance Committee." Sandra listened intently as Jake explained the committee's purpose: to oversee the implementation of the new policies and act as a bridge between employees and leadership. The idea was to have representatives from all levels of the company, ensuring that everyone's voice was heard. Jake's voice softened as he continued, "I think you'd be perfect for it. You see things most people don't, and you care about this place more than you let on." Sandra was taken aback. She had never considered herself a candidate for something like this. She was just a cleaner, someone who operated behind the scenes, unnoticed and unacknowledged. The thought of stepping into a more visible role filled her with both excitement and dread. "Why me?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Jake smiled. "Because you're honest, and that's exactly what this company needs right now." Sandra didn't respond immediately. She spent the next few days mulling over Jake's suggestion, weighing the risks and rewards. Joining the committee would mean stepping out of her comfort zone, exposing herself to scrutiny, and potentially drawing attention to her role in exposing the corruption. But it would also give her the opportunity to make a lasting impact, to ensure that no one else had to endure the same injustices she had witnessed. The decision wasn't easy, but Sandra eventually found her answer in an unexpected encounter. One night, as she was cleaning the executive floor, she came across a young intern who was working late. The intern, who looked barely out of college, was sitting at her desk with tears streaming down her face. Sandra approached her cautiously, offering a tissue and a sympathetic ear. The intern hesitated before opening up, explaining that she felt overwhelmed and undervalued, afraid that her voice didn't matter in such a large, impersonal company. Sandra listened quietly, her heart aching for the young woman. In that moment, she saw a reflection of her younger self, full of potential but burdened by circumstances beyond her control. It was then that Sandra realized she couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. She had a chance to make a difference, not just for herself but for others like the intern, who deserved to be heard and respected. The next day, Sandra approached Jake and told him she was interested in joining the committee. Jake's face lit up with genuine excitement. "You won't regret this," he assured her. Together, they filled out the necessary paperwork and submitted Sandra's application. A week later, she received an email from the board congratulating her on being selected as a member of the Integrity and Compliance Committee. Sandra's new role was both exhilarating and daunting. She attended her first committee meeting with a mix of nerves and determination, sitting alongside employees from various departments. The group included senior managers, mid-level employees, and even a representative from the cleaning staff, a deliberate choice to ensure diverse perspectives. Sandra felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years, but she also knew that the real work was just beginning. The committee's first task was to review the company's existing policies and identify areas for improvement. Sandra quickly proved herself to be an invaluable member, offering insights that others often overlooked. Her unique position as someone who had operated behind the scenes gave her a perspective that was both refreshing and essential. She spoke with quiet authority, earning the respect of her peers and even the interim CEO, who praised her for her thoughtful contributions. As the committee worked tirelessly to implement the new reforms, Sandra faced challenges she hadn't anticipated. Not everyone was receptive to change, and some employees viewed the committee with skepticism, believing it to be little more than a PR stunt. Sandra encountered resistance from a few senior managers who resented being held accountable, and there were moments when she questioned whether her efforts were making a difference. But Sandra's resolve never wavered. She drew strength from the support of her daughter, her fellow committee members, and even Jake, who had become a trusted ally. Over time, she began to see the impact of her work. Employees started to feel more empowered, speaking up in meetings and using the anonymous feedback channels to voice their concerns. The culture of fear and secrecy that had once defined AlphaCorp was slowly being replaced by a sense of openness and collaboration. Sandra's journey was far from over, but she had come a long way from the woman who had quietly pushed her cleaning cart through the halls of AlphaCorp. She had discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed, and she had found a purpose that went beyond her daily tasks. For the first time in her life, Sandra felt truly seen, not just as a cleaner, but as a force for change. Her story became an inspiration to those around her, a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage can have a ripple effect. Sandra's decision to step into the light had not only transformed her own life but also the lives of countless others, proving that no matter where you start, you have the power to make a difference. And as she left the office that night, her cleaning cart replaced by a briefcase, Sandra knew that her journey was only just beginning. The transformation of Sandra's life and the changes at AlphaCorp became the talk of the entire city. People whispered about the company cleaner who had stepped into a powerful role, guiding a corporation through one of its darkest times. Yet, for all the progress made, challenges loomed. The public fallout from Douglas Carrington's misconduct had severely damaged AlphaCorp's reputation, and the company faced lawsuits, declining revenues, and a tarnished brand image. Sandra found herself not only navigating her new role but also becoming an unexpected symbol of resilience and reform. Within the Integrity and Compliance Committee, the work intensified. Sandra's evenings, once spent in quiet solitude with her cleaning supplies, were now consumed by meetings, policy reviews, and discussions about how to rebuild trust among employees and stakeholders. She often stayed late into the night, poring over reports and listening to employees' concerns. For Sandra, this was more than a job, it was a mission. Yet, the weight of responsibility was immense, and she began to feel the strain. Her most challenging moment came when the committee decided to host an open forum, inviting employees from all levels to share their experiences and ideas for improving the company. Sandra was asked to lead the session, a task that filled her with equal parts pride and anxiety. Standing in front of an audience, speaking not as a cleaner but as a decision-maker, was a leap she wasn't sure she was ready for. The day of the forum arrived, and the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Sandra stood at the podium, her heart pounding as she faced the crowd. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know many of you don't know me," she started, her voice steady despite the nerves. "For years, I walked these halls as someone most of you never noticed. I was invisible, but I saw everything. And what I saw was a company full of talented, hard-working people who deserved better." The room fell silent as Sandra shared her story, from her days as a cleaner to her role in exposing the corruption that had plagued the company. She spoke about the fear and doubt she had faced, but also about the strength she had found in standing up for what was right. "This company is more than just its leadership," she concluded. "It's all of you. And together, we can make it better." Her words struck a chord. Employees began to open up, sharing stories of their struggles and frustrations but also their hopes for the future. The forum became a turning point, a moment of collective catharsis that reignited a sense of unity within the company. Sandra left the stage that day feeling a renewed sense of purpose, her confidence bolstered by the knowledge that her voice mattered. However, not everyone was pleased with the changes. Among the senior managers, resentment simmered. For years, they had operated under a culture that rewarded ambition and loyalty to the top brass, often at the expense of ethics. Now, they found themselves under scrutiny, their decisions questioned by a woman they had once dismissed as insignificant. Sandra became the target of subtle hostility, dismissive comments in meetings, exclusion from key discussions, and even rumors aimed at undermining her credibility. One manager in particular, William Harrington, seemed determined to make Sandra's life difficult. A longtime ally of Carrington, William had built his career on backroom deals and loyalty to the old regime. He viewed Sandra as an outsider, someone unworthy of her position, and he wasn't shy about expressing his disdain. At a committee meeting, William openly challenged one of Sandra's proposals, dismissing it as naive and unrealistic. Sandra, however, refused to back down. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington," she said calmly, "naivety is assuming that the old ways will work in a company that's trying to rebuild trust. The employees deserve better, and so do our shareholders. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary." Her words drew murmurs of approval from the other committee members, leaving William visibly irked. But Sandra knew this was just the beginning. If she was going to succeed, she would need to navigate the treacherous waters of office politics while staying true to her principles. Outside of work, Sandra found herself grappling with another challenge, balancing her new responsibilities with her personal life. Mia, now a freshman at university, had always been Sandra's anchor, but the demands of her new role often left her with little time to connect with her daughter. One evening, during a rare phone call, Mia expressed her pride in Sandra's accomplishments but also her concern. "Mom, don't forget to take care of yourself," she said gently. "You've always been there for me, and I want to make sure you're okay." Mia's words stayed with Sandra, reminding her of the importance of maintaining balance. She began setting aside time each week to unwind, whether it was reading a book, taking a walk, or simply enjoying a quiet meal. These moments of self-care became a source of strength, helping her navigate the pressures of her new role. The next major challenge came in the form of a whistleblower policy the committee was tasked with drafting. Sandra knew firsthand the risks of speaking out, and she was determined to create a system that protected employees while encouraging transparency. The policy became a point of contention, with some managers arguing that it would invite false accusations and create a culture of distrust. Sandra listened to their concerns but remained steadfast. A culture of distrust already exists, she pointed out. This policy isn't about creating problems, it's about addressing them before they become crises. If we want people to speak up, we need to make them feel safe. Her persistence paid off. The policy was approved, and Sandra felt a sense of accomplishment knowing that she had helped create a lasting change. But the victory was short-lived. A few weeks later, she received an anonymous tip about another potential scandal, this one involving a high-ranking executive who had been quietly exploiting company resources for personal gain. The revelation was a stark reminder that the battle for integrity was far from over. Sandra found herself once again in the role of investigator, working with the legal team to uncover the truth. The process was grueling, requiring long hours and difficult conversations, but Sandra was undeterred. She knew that the stakes were too high to back down. As the investigation unfolded, Sandra began to notice a shift in the company's culture. Employees were more willing to speak up, and there was a growing sense of accountability among the leadership. For the first time in years, Sandra felt hopeful about the future of Alpha Corp. Her journey had been anything but easy, marked by challenges and setbacks that tested her resolve. But as she stood in the boardroom one evening, reviewing the final draft of the company's new code of ethics, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had started as an invisible cleaner, overlooked and underestimated, but she had become a force for change, proving that even the smallest voices can make a difference. Sandra's story wasn't just about her own transformation, it was about the power of courage, integrity, and perseverance. It was a story of redemption, not just for her but for a company that had lost its way. And as she left the office that night, the city skyline glowing in the distance, Sandra knew that her work was far from over. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever came next. The whirlwind of transformation sweeping through Alpha Corp had reached a point where the company was no longer just trying to recover, it was beginning to redefine itself. Sandra, at the heart of these changes, had grown into her role as an integral figure in the company's efforts to rebuild trust and transparency. However, the weight of her responsibilities never eased. Each day brought new challenges, and each night was filled with reflection on whether she was making the right decisions. Sandra's work with the Integrity and Compliance Committee had already borne fruit. Employee morale had improved, and the whistleblower policy she championed became a cornerstone of the company's new identity. Yet, Sandra was acutely aware that the road to meaningful change was long and fraught with obstacles. The investigation into the second scandal, a high-ranking executive exploiting company resources, was proving to be one of the toughest battles yet. The accused executive, Mark Reynolds, was a seasoned professional with a strong network of allies within the company. His influence cast a long shadow, and those investigating him often found themselves stonewalled or intimidated. Sandra, however, refused to be deterred. She poured her energy into gathering evidence and coordinating with the legal team. Her natural ability to notice details others missed proved invaluable. Late one night, as she reviewed financial records in the quiet of her modest home, she spotted a series of small, seemingly innocuous transactions that, when pieced together, painted a damning picture. It was a breakthrough, but Sandra knew the evidence needed to be airtight to stand up to Reynolds's formidable defense. As the investigation progressed, Sandra faced mounting pressure from multiple sides. Supporters of Reynolds within the company began to question the motives of the Integrity and Compliance Committee, accusing it of overreach and targeting high-level executives unfairly. Rumors swirled, and the tension in the office became palpable. Sandra's role as a visible leader in the reform efforts made her a target for criticism, and whispers of resentment reached her ears. Despite the backlash, Sandra's resolve remained unshaken. She had endured too much, sacrificed too much, to let fear dictate her actions now. Yet, the stress began to take a toll on her. Nights once spent with her daughter Mia on phone calls were now consumed by endless meetings and strategizing sessions. Sandra often wondered if she had taken on more than she could handle. But every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the people who depended on her, the employees who deserved a better workplace, the whistleblowers who had risked everything to come forward, and her daughter, who looked up to her as a symbol of strength and integrity. The tipping point came during a pivotal board meeting where the findings of the Reynolds investigation were presented. Sandra, armed with the evidence she had meticulously compiled, stood before the board members, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. She laid out the case against Reynolds with clarity and precision, walking them through the web of deceit he had spun to siphon company funds into his personal ventures. The room was silent as she concluded, the gravity of her words hanging in the air. Reynolds, who was present at the meeting, immediately launched into a fiery defense, accusing Sandra and the committee of orchestrating a witch hunt. His tone was combative, his words laced with condescension. "This is outrageous," he declared, slamming his fist on the table. "We're allowing a former cleaning lady to dictate the fate of this company? This is a joke." Sandra felt a wave of anger but kept her composure. She met Reynolds's gaze, her voice firm as she replied, "This isn't about me. It's about the truth. And the truth doesn't care about titles or backgrounds. What matters is doing what's right, for the employees, for the shareholders, and for the future of this company." Her words silenced Reynolds, and for the first time, Sandra felt the full weight of the room's attention on her. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and respect. The interim CEO, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Thank you, Sandra," he said. "Your dedication and courage have been instrumental in bringing this issue to light. We will take immediate action." The decision to terminate Reynolds and pursue legal action was announced the following week. The news sent ripples through the company, reinforcing the message that Alpha Corp was committed to accountability at all levels. For Sandra, it was a moment of triumph, but also one of reflection. She had achieved what many thought impossible, yet she knew her journey was far from over. The aftermath of the Reynolds scandal marked a turning point not just for Alpha Corp, but for Sandra personally. Her role within the company continued to evolve, and she found herself increasingly involved in broader discussions about corporate ethics and governance. Invitations to speak at industry conferences began to trickle in, and Sandra, once invisible in the halls of Alpha Corp, became a recognized voice in the world of corporate reform. One such invitation came from a prestigious business ethics conference held in New York City. Sandra hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to step onto such a prominent stage. But with encouragement from Mia and her colleagues, she decided to accept. The experience proved transformative. Standing before an audience of industry leaders, Sandra shared her story, not as a tale of personal triumph, but as a call to action for businesses everywhere to prioritize integrity over profit. Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and afterward, she was approached by attendees who praised her courage and sought her advice. For Sandra, it was a surreal moment, a testament to how far she had come from her days as a cleaner. But she remained grounded, always mindful of the lessons she had learned along the way. Back at Alpha Corp, the changes Sandra had fought for began to take root. The company's culture shifted, driven by a renewed commitment to transparency and employee empowerment. New initiatives were launched to support professional development at all levels, and Sandra played a key role in mentoring employees who aspired to make a difference. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, not just for Alpha Corp but for anyone who had ever felt overlooked or underestimated. Sandra's journey also inspired her daughter, Mia, who began to explore ways to make an impact in her own life. Watching her mother's transformation gave Mia the confidence to pursue her dreams fearlessly, and the bond between them grew stronger than ever. As the months turned into years, Sandra reflected on the extraordinary path her life had taken. She had faced challenges that would have broken many, but she had emerged stronger, driven by a deep sense of purpose. Her story became a beacon for others, a reminder that even the most ordinary people can achieve the extraordinary when they have the courage to stand up for what's right. And while Sandra knew that her work was never truly done, she also knew that she had already made a lasting impact. Alpha Corp was no longer just a company, it was a community, one that valued honesty, respect, and the contributions of every individual. And Sandra, the woman who had once been invisible, was at the heart of it all. Sandra's life had transformed in ways she never imagined, but the true depth of her impact became evident as time went on. The changes at Alpha Corp were no longer confined to its offices or the employees within, they began rippling out into the broader community. The story of how a cleaning lady had risen to become a symbol of integrity and reform captivated people far beyond the city. News outlets picked up her journey, branding her as a modern-day hero in the fight for corporate accountability. Yet, as Sandra's influence grew, so did the challenges she faced. One of the most daunting challenges arose when Sandra was approached by a coalition of employees from another company, Titan Enterprises. This corporation had been plagued by allegations of systemic corruption, discrimination, and unethical practices for years. Inspired by Sandra's story, the employees reached out to her, desperate for guidance on how to initiate change within their own organization. They explained how their leadership had ignored complaints, retaliated against whistleblowers, and fostered a toxic culture that left employees feeling powerless. Sandra was initially hesitant. She was still deeply invested in her work at Alpha Corp and unsure if she had the capacity to take on such a monumental task elsewhere. However, she couldn't ignore the parallels between Titan Enterprises and the situation she had faced at Alpha Corp. She knew what it felt like to be powerless, invisible, and trapped in an environment where speaking out seemed impossible. After days of contemplation, she decided to meet with the employees and hear their stories. The meeting took place in a small conference room at a community center. Sandra listened as employees recounted their experiences, stories of harassment brushed under the rug, promotions denied to deserving candidates, and profits prioritized over basic ethical standards. Their pain was palpable, and Sandra felt a familiar anger rising within her. It was a stark reminder of why she had taken on this fight in the first place. Sandra agreed to help, but she made it clear that change wouldn't come easily. "It's going to take courage," she told them. "You'll face resistance, doubt, and fear. But if you stand together, if you believe in what you're fighting for, you can make a difference." Over the next few months, Sandra worked tirelessly with the coalition, helping them develop a strategy to bring their concerns to light. Drawing on her experience at Alpha Corp, she advised them on gathering evidence, building alliances, and navigating the complexities of corporate politics. She also connected them with legal experts and advocacy groups, ensuring they had the resources and support needed to take on such a powerful entity. As Sandra balanced her work with Titan Enterprises and her ongoing responsibilities at Alpha Corp, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She was no longer the woman who quietly observed injustices from the sidelines, she was a leader, a mentor, and a beacon of hope for those who felt voiceless. Yet, she remained humble, always emphasizing that her success was not a solo effort. "It's not about me," she often said. "It's about all of us standing up for what's right." Back at Alpha Corp, Sandra's influence continued to grow. She spearheaded a new mentorship program designed to support employees from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring they had the opportunities and guidance needed to thrive. The program quickly became one of the company's most celebrated initiatives, attracting praise from industry leaders and inspiring other organizations to adopt similar models. Sandra also began collaborating with local schools and community organizations, sharing her story to inspire young people to pursue their dreams despite the obstacles they might face. Her message was simple but powerful: your background doesn't define your future. Your choices do. She often spoke about the importance of resilience, integrity, and the courage to take risks, values that resonated deeply with her audience. Despite her growing influence, Sandra faced moments of doubt and exhaustion. The pressure to maintain her momentum, combined with the emotional weight of her work, often left her feeling drained. Yet, she found strength in the people around her: her daughter Mia, who continued to be her biggest cheerleader, Jake, whose unwavering support reminded her she wasn't alone, and the countless individuals who shared their stories of how her journey had inspired them. One of the most profound moments of Sandra's journey came during a special event at Alpha Corp, held to commemorate the company's transformation. The interim CEO, who had become one of Sandra's strongest allies, invited her to speak. The event was attended by employees, board members, community leaders, and even some of the company's fiercest critics. As Sandra stood on stage, looking out at the crowd, she felt a surge of emotion. She thought about her first days at Alpha Corp, pushing a cleaning cart through the halls, feeling invisible and insignificant. She thought about the risks she had taken, the challenges she had faced, and the lives she had touched along the way. And she thought about her late mother, who had always told her to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. Sandra began her speech by thanking everyone who had supported her journey, emphasizing that the changes at Alpha Corp were the result of collective effort. "This isn't just my story," she said. "It's our story. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together, when we refuse to accept the status quo and fight for something better." She spoke about the lessons she had learned, from the importance of listening to others to the power of persistence in the face of adversity. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "It's a process, and it's messy. But it's worth it. Every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to the world we want to create." Sandra ended her speech with a challenge to everyone in the room: each of us has the power to make a difference, no matter where we start or what our title is. So I ask you, what will you do to create change? What legacy do you want to leave behind? The room erupted in applause, and as Sandra stepped off the stage, she was greeted by a wave of gratitude and admiration. Employees lined up to thank her, sharing stories of how her courage had inspired them to take action in their own lives. For Sandra, it was a deeply humbling experience, a reminder that her journey was about more than just corporate reform. It was about empowering others to believe in their own potential. As the years went on, Sandra continued to make an impact, both at Alpha Corp and beyond. She became a sought-after speaker and advisor, using her platform to advocate for ethics, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Yet, she never lost sight of her roots, always emphasizing the values that had guided her journey. Sandra's story became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of courage. It reminded people that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is possible when you have the strength to stand up for what's right. And though her journey was far from over, Sandra knew she had already achieved something extraordinary, not just for herself, but for countless others who now dared to believe in a brighter future.